First off, I want to start off as far as Minnesota cartoonists with myself. I want to kind of show you like my journey as a cartoonist, because it's one of those fields where it's not the standard field of operations as far as getting a job. You bounce around a lot to different things, especially doing freelance. And also, it's not linear, this kind of path, because you have an idea of what you would like to do, and then life takes you in a different way, as it does with everything. So, this is the cartoonist as a youth, back in the 1970s. Big into comic books, of course. On the left there, if you can see, as with everyone in my age group, we were in a print ad for the Walker Art Center. That little kid, if you can see the little, it looks like a little cross. That's me as a kid just laying down flat, looking at the exhibition at the Walker Art Center. So, conceptual art like that wasn't my forte. Pretty much into comic books, as you can tell by dressing up as Spider-Man. Now, this is my first comic book convention at age 14. It was very interesting growing up in the 70s, because fandom was really starting to take off as far as comic books were concerned. Before that, no comic book stores. You had people trading them every so often. But in the 70s, all of a sudden you had Schindler's, which was downtown, started to sell back issues, which was like just an incredible revelation that this would even be a collector's market. And then Comic City opened up, Nostalgia Zone. The Minneapolis area had a bunch of different places where you could buy comic art, which was just so cool as a kid growing up. Now, on the right here, and like I said, hopefully you can kind of make it out. So, in the 70s when I was growing up, Spider-Man newspaper strip came out. And it was drawn by John Romita. So I was clipping them out every day, putting them in the scrapbook. And then the paper said, well, enough of that, we're going to drop it. So at age 14, I wrote an angry letter to the editor and said, no, we need Spider-Man back. So that drawing there is my first run-in with newspaper reproduction. That black little blob was actually I had all the spider webs, everything drawn in nicely, and there you go. So that's my first experience with newspaper reproduction. Now, once again, as far as finding your path, as far as being an artist, as far as being whatever you're pursuing, I was jumping around to a bunch of different schools locally here. There was a school called Atelier Lac, which was in Uptown originally, and great foundation. I got to learn about charcoal drawing, human figure drawing, fantastic. But they kind of focused in on oil painting at the time, and wasn't my focus. So I tried something else. Went to the Minneapolis College of Art and Design for a semester. Back then, in the 80s, they were not keen on comic art whatsoever, and it wasn't really seen as an art form whatsoever. So they were very much into conceptual art. Once again, not my forte. I ended up being dropping off. See, So, yeah, we just had this conversation earlier. So once again, it was kind of frowned on. Comic art, cartooning wasn't thought of as a real job whatsoever. So I was still picking up comic books here and there, and I was picking up a comic called Swamp Thing, and it was drawn by Stephen Bissett and John Toddlebed. And there was an interview in the Comics Journal. And once again, this is in the 80s. So they talked about the Joe Kubert School, which had just been open 10 years by the time this interview came out. And it was a school that taught cartooning. It was one of the only ones in the country that did at the time. So I was like, okay, this is incredible. These are incredible artists. This is what I want to be doing. So ended up applying to the Joe Kubert School and ended up getting in. On the left there is Joe Kubert at his giant drawing table. I didn't even know how much of an icon he was in the field when I went there. Luckily I didn't, or I would have been just incredibly intimidated. So you had this school, it was all taught by professionals in the field. So whatever they were teaching, that's what they were doing professionally. And it was just a godsend, because I didn't know about brushes, I didn't know about inks, I didn't know about anything as far as how to draw. So it was like, here's professionals in the field telling you what kind of paper, what kind of pen nibs, everything. So, and it would pay off immensely when I was trying to find a job later. So comics in the 80s. When I was going to high school, when I was going to middle school, comics were kind of frowned upon. It was a kid's medium. So all of a sudden in the 80s, when I'm going to school, there was this huge renaissance as far as comic books. You had The Dark Knight by Frank Miller. You had Watchmen by Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons. Mouse by Art Spiegelman. All of a sudden, you had comics written up in the New York Times, which wasn't a thing before. Like papers now have like reviews of graphic novels, manga, all different things. That would be like a newspaper, that would be like the news reporting on the National Enquirer stories. Like, it just wasn't a thing. So you had this breakout of comic books in the 80s about what this industry, what this medium can actually do, which hasn't for the longest time in the United States. And also, another book that came out is like you had Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out. And I know it's a hard subject for you. But that was creator-owned. In the 80s, you had all this self-published stuff. You had all these creator-owned things happening. And once again, that was like a huge, like 180 as far as how things used to be done. So Eastman and Lard, they owned the rights to their creation. So when there was movies, when there was books, when there was merchandise, they made money off it. Now, you, on the opposite end of that, which was kind of the norm for the industry, you have someone like Bill Finger, who co-created the character. I don't know if you know the character, he's called Batman. So he co-created Batman with a guy called Bob Kane. Bill Finger ended up dying penniless and was buried in a pauper's grave. Like, just completely forgotten, wasn't even recognized at the time, all the work he had done. Bob Kane's name was plastered everywhere. Bill Finger was just forgotten. Thanks to incredible reporting of recent, that's been rectified, and he's now credited at least. But he was just forgotten in the industry. So creator-owned was huge in the 80s as far as, oh, wait a minute, there's all these people who created all these fabulous characters and they aren't being compensated. So it was just like I said, a 180 as far as how things should be done. So now, me coming out of the Kubert School, I was King Features at the time was looking for a colorist, and they shopped around to area schools. And what ended up happening is I was one of the people Joe Kubert referred as far as to the job, and ended up getting the job. But what's interesting is they shopped around for the Joe Kubert School and the School of Visual Arts, all these different schools for students. They only had second interviews with people from the Kubert School because we were the only ones who knew about color guides. We were the only ones who knew the specs and everything's devoted to comic strips. So once again, going to the Kubert School, it was just such a benefit to be taught by people in the field who were teaching you actually what was going on out there. So ended up working at King Feature Syndicate. Now, at King Feature Syndicate, I worked there in the late 80s to the 90s. It was a pivotal time because at the Kubert School, pen and ink, there was no computers whatsoever. All of a sudden in the 90s, you're plopped into the situation where companies are putting a computer in front of you and they say, learn this. So a huge shift in the industry, and it was a case of either catch up or you fall behind and you don't have a job. So it was one of those things where there was a lot of artists who weren't able to adapt. They ended up, I don't want to learn computers. Well, they ended up being out of jobs because instead of even mailing stuff in, people would get stuff digitally. So now you're out of a job because you aren't adapting to the market, which teaching it, I've taught at MCAT, we jump ahead a little, but like you really have to tell the students, like you have to adapt to where the industry's going. And it's great to have the old traditional tools at your disposal, but you have to have the new methods as well. There has to be a mix for you to get work in the industry. So I ended up doing color guides there, fashion illustrations. I even ghosted a strip on the right, if you can see it, a strip called Secret Agent Corrigan. And ghosting is when you are actually doing a strip, you're an assistant for another artist, and you're mimicking their style, so it doesn't look, the strip doesn't look so different, it looks unrecognizable. It's a great way for young artists as an apprenticeship, like it was for me. Also, like more established artists, you just get steady work by being an assistant to another comic book artist or a comic strip artist, which I ended up doing as well. Now, all those jobs led to me doing Flash Gordon. This was a case of, they had been looking for an artist for a while. I worked up samples with a script from the writer, and they were resoundingly rejected. And so it was like, okay, I'm not getting that job. But I ended up actually writing a story myself, which I kind of thought showcased my work more. So I wrote the story, did up samples, and this is like literally a couple years after I'd been rejected because they still hadn't found the new artist and writer yet. Ended up getting hired for Flash Gordon, and when I got hired, because I had written the story myself, they said, hey, would you like to write it too? Now, never having written a story in my life, I said, well, yeah, I can do that. So no problem. Ended up being the writer and artist, and my sample pages ended up being some of the first stuff printed, which is just unusual. Now, as far as teaching at MCAT, jump ahead a little bit, move back to Minneapolis, ended up teaching at the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, teaching comic art. Now, this is the school that kind of frowned on comic art back in the 80s. Now, Professor Barb Schulz is head of the department. They have a comic art major. I think we have some of the teachers here as well. So, and they have, it was an incredible opportunity, first of all, and that's like my Robin Williams moment from Dead Poet Society in the center. On the right there, though, when I was going to the Kubert School, it was like 98% guys as far as the male to female ratio. It was like 98% guys. By the time I was teaching at MCAD, more than half of the students were women. So it's one of those cases where, and I think also you had so much manga and different, it wasn't just superhero stuff then. You had manga, different styles, different genres. Thank you very much. So just more stuff of interest to a more wider group of people. So now you have a lot more diversity in it because of these younger kids coming up. And I mean younger kids in their 20s and 30s now, because I'm a little bit older. So now, once again, the journey is weird, because when I came back to Minneapolis, I contacted MCAT, I contacted local cartoonists, like people looking for work. You kind of like find the group of people who are doing the work. So I would go to comic conventions introduced myself to local artists, one of them being Craig McIntosh. And when he was looking for someone as an assistant, he ended up reaching out to me because I had just been in touch with him. I knew the syndicate, he knew I could do the art style, and I ended up assisting him on Sally Forth. So, and just like a little bit backstory on Sally Forth. So Sally Forth, created by a Minnesota native, just so you know, Greg Howard. Greg Howard created Sally Forth in the 80s. After 10 years, he handed over the art to Craig McIntosh to draw. And then a little later on, he was like, okay, I'm done. He ended up selling Sally Forth to King Features, because when you bring a strip to a syndicate, you have part ownership. So he was able to do that. And they ended up hiring Francesco Marciuliano to do the writing. And that's the guy I work with now. So once again, and I want to just touch on this, as far as getting work in the industry, I still had to try out for the job of Flash Gordon, for Sally Forth. What I ended up doing, I did the sample pages, of course, that they wanted, but like anyone who knew Jim Keefe as far as cartoonist knew me as the Flash Gordon guy. So I wanted to do a sample page which really tied into, yes, I did Flash Gordon, but I can do Sally Forth. So it's one of those cases when looking for a job, and this can be any job in any field, you want to fulfill the requirements of what they're asking for, but if you go beyond what they want and kind of show off what you can do, it's a situation where you're kind of showing them, like, I'm a good fit for this job. It's an easy decision for you. Just hire me. So in this situation, once again, I was fortunate to get the job. Can't stress enough that I'm focusing on the jobs I got. Tons of rejection in the middle of this, like skipping from New York to moving to Minnesota. You know, it's like rejection, rejection, rejection. Oh, I got a job. Rejection, rejection. That's how life works. So now I want to focus on some Minnesota cartoonists, though, with the Sally Forth connection. Now, with jumping back to Greg Howard, I want to touch base on how groundbreaking Sally Forth was. I actually want to read, I'm going to read the bottom panel real quick because I'm sure you can't read it. And so Sally Forth is coming in to the door. You need something to help you unwind after work, a hobby maybe. And Sally Forth says, I'm starting a new hobby tonight. And then you can see, where's the gin? So what Greg Howard was doing, now in this like the 30s to the 80s, women in comics were the housewife. They were very much secondary. Even in the comic strip like Blondie, they were secondary. Like Dagwood was the star of the strip. Blondie is like is kind of like the straight man of the strip is Blondie. So what Greg Howard did is he really did something. He made it as far as a woman being the focus of the strip, and as far as it was groundbreaking at the time, and because it was original and funny, it took off. And Sally Forth had become a part of a new generation of comic strip, along with Lynn Johnson's For Better or Worse, Kathy Guyswhite's Kathy, that showed women taking center stage in a more modern setting. This is in the 80s. It wasn't that long ago where this shift took. And it's amazing that it took so long. And like Francesco and I have been, like, we just celebrated Sally Forth's 40th anniversary. We wouldn't have the strip if not for the bedrock success that Greg Howard did. Now, on to some Minnesota cartoonists. This first one up is Wally Wood, and he's most well known for EC Comics and Mad Magazine, and also Sally Forth, which not the Sally Forth Greg Howard did. Sally Forth that Wally Wood did wasn't wearing clothes for most of the strip. This is actually one of the few pictures where she's actually wearing clothes, but there you go. On the right there, and I hope you can kind of get an idea of what's happening with, but this is from Mad Magazine, and it's literally Wally Wood playing with panel layout where the characters are literally busting out of the strip. They're like the panel borders are ripping, tearing, and they actually fall out the page. Incredibly innovative stuff. On the left here, it's an iconic piece called Wally Wood's 22 Panels That Always Work. It's funny because it's very much when a writer is, you're looking at the script, you're trying to draw the strip, and every so often, I mean, especially on a comic strip, on a comic book, the grind is immense. So sometimes you need a refresher of like all the different kind of layouts you could do. And this is like a cheat sheet as far as like, hey, you can do like a headshot, a foreground. These are 22 panels just to kind of mix up the visual so you can make it interesting for the reader. And he had this, Wally Wood had a studio, had a bunch of assistants who became incredible cartoonists as well. And he had this just hanging up in the studio for other artists like, hey, if you're stuck, look at this. This stuff works. On the right is also something he had hanging up in the studio. Never draw anything you can copy. Never copy anything you can trace. Never trace anything you can cut out and paste it. This isn't about plagiarism. It's literally about getting the work done. It's an immense amount of work getting these comic strips and comic books done. And for Sally Forth, there's set pieces I reuse. There's character sheets, which I've drawn, which I'll trace just to lay out pages, just to get it going. Sometimes you need that little just push to just get the work done. So it's about meeting the deadline, which is just crucial. Next cartoonist up. I am not the first Minnesota cartoonist to work on Flash Gordon either. This is Austin Briggs. He is an incredible illustrator and also from Minnesota. These are all Minnesota cartoonists, of course. And he actually followed Alex Raymond doing Flash Gordon. And Flash Gordon just took off in the 30s, incredibly well drawn by Alex Raymond. And so they decided to do a daily strip as well. Alex Raymond, he had Austin Briggs as an assistant. And he was like, yeah, if I do a daily and a Sunday, I will die. That'll just kill me. So Austin Briggs started doing the dailies and also took over the Sunday strip later. Next Minnesota cartoonist we have is Ward Kimball. He was one of Disney's main team of animators back in the day, known collectively as Disney's 9 Old Men. This is a character sheet of Jiminy Cricket. Pinocchio, thank you very much. But he worked on Snow White, he worked on Pinocchio, Fantasia, numerous others. Amazing animator. Next up is a newspaper cartoonist, Dick Ginden. He did iconic gag panels for the Minneapolis Tribune in the 70s. The Dinah gag in the center is just, this is one of my favorites. So it has the mother talking to the little son. They're all very in their foo-foo little home. But goes, Daddy and I weren't born in Edina, dear. We achieved Edina. He just nailed the whole Minnesota. Yeah, he nailed Minnesota. That's all I got to say to it. And also, so my mom actually had this cartoon on the right hanging in the entryway. We lived in Golden Valley, and he actually did a strip on Golden Valley. Golden Valley with the sign as you enter. Wipe your feet. Another newspaper cartoonist, Steve Sack. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning cartoonist. Fantastic artist. And I also I hope you can kind of see it. It's a paper mache sculpture that he did on the right there. Just multi-talented and an incredible cartoonist. Next up is Terry Gilliam, cartoonist, animator, director. He actually, he was the animator for Monty Python. He would work on such amazing films as a director as far as Brazil, Fisher King, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. He actually first met John Cleese. John Cleese, when they did a photo comic for Harvey Kurtzman's Help magazine. Harvey Kurtzman did Mad Magazine, did like just a incredibly prolific writer and cartoonist. He did a strip called Little Annie Fanny for Playboy, which ran for years and years and years and years with cartoonist Bill Elder. Am I correct? I'm lucky I got this just wealth of cartoonists here to like, that's right. Am I right? Yell out if I'm wrong on any of this. So, Gilliam first met John Cleese before the Monty Python. They did this photo comic where John Cleese plays this character where the daughter gets a Barbie and the husband falls in love with the Barbie doll. And then the scene in, hopefully you can see at the top right there, it's where Cleese in the comic discovers that Barbie already has a boyfriend and he just discovered Ken and he's just mortified that Barbie already has a boyfriend. And the pictures on the right are from Monty Python and the Holy Grail, some of the animation for that. So, and Terry Gilliam was born here, but they made a run for it shortly after he was born. Like, so he wasn't raised here, but he was born here. Comic book artist C.C. Beck, who created Captain Marvel. He was also Zumbrota, Minnesota. I didn't know there was a Zumbrota, Minnesota. Way south, I'm finding out. So, interesting thing about Captain Marvel is, so Captain Marvel comes out, incredibly successful, and DC Comics, I think in the 50s, ended up suing them. It was like, yeah, too similar to Superman, so you can't do it. So they ended up having to stop doing Captain Marvel, but then later, Captain Marvel, Fawcett licensed it to DC. So DC is like, okay, yeah, now you can do it, that we're making the money off of it. But Captain Marvel, now Marvel Comics is doing a character called Captain Marvel. So it was like, okay, but you can't call him Captain Marvel. So they ended up calling him Shazam, which is the word what he would say to turn into Captain Marvel. So this is like all the stuff that behind the scenes happened, because it is like, oh, that's Captain Marvel. No, that's Shazam. What are you talking about? Well, yeah, there was some behind the scenes stuff that everyone was getting sued. So that's what was happening. Now, not one, not two, but 3 Superman artists are from Minnesota. We are Supermen here. That's why we have 3 Superman artists coming from here. So Wayne Boring, he did Superman in the Golden Age. He pretty much followed Joe Shuster drawing it. Joe Shuster, along with Jerry Siegel, are the creators of Superman. So Wayne Boring did it after Joe Shuster. Well, actually, during Joe Shuster and during those years, it was a case of the character took off so big that it was like a comic book. It was multiple comic books. It was a comic strip, and they ended up hiring different artists to help. There was such a demand for this character. Second Minnesota cartoonist to do Superman, Curt Swan, and he did the iconic Superman that my generation grew up with. He did it during the Silver Age, 60s into the 70s. Alan Moore did a fantastic story as far as the end of Superman. Curt Swan illustrated it, doing a beautiful job, and such a perfect fit, because it was like the transition to the new age of Superman. So they had Curt Swan do the final farewell to the character. Now, last but not least, we have Dan Jurgens, who may be on actually having a table out there, which I know because I saw him in the bathroom. I didn't say hello in the bathroom. That's not something you do. But he's tabling out here. Make sure to say hello. He's probably best known for the seminal Death of Superman story, which in the 90s, it sold. Oh my God, it sold so much. And it was so funny because they had killed off Superman in the comics a number of times, but the media around it is like, oh my gosh, Superman's over, they're ending it. It was like, really? You really think they're doing that? Okay. And it just sold like gangbusters. Dan Jurgens did an incredible job. The actual issue where they kill off Superman, every page is a panel. It was just, so it's like beautiful Dan Jurgens art, full size page after page after page. Now, last but not least, I want to focus on Charles Schulz. Minneapolis, born in Minneapolis, moved to St. Paul. The History Museum right now has an amazing exhibit that runs only until June 9th. So if you haven't seen it yet, I don't know if there's someone in the front row here who's interested, make sure to go see it. I've been over there, it's amazing. They even have a map. What's kind of cool too is they have a map where they show, like, here's where he was born in Minneapolis. Here's where he lived in St. Paul. And the barber shop that featured very prominently early in the strip, that was patterned after his dad's barber shop, which used to be on Snelling Avenue. And speaking of the shop on Snelling Avenue, this is a slide from the Minnesota Post. Today, I think there's condos where the barbershop used to be, where the Schulz barbershop used to be. Before that, it was a pub called O'Gara's. And O'Gara's, this is the display they had up. They had some original art, some prints, and a barbershop pole. They had a barbershop pole there just to kind of memorialize, hey, this is where the barbershop used to be. Local cartoonists used to gather there. Minnesota Cartoonist Conspiracy, I think they were called, or Minnesota Comic Book Association. But I mean, that's where you used to go. And cartoonists would come out of town and be like, oh, I want to go to O'Gara's because that's where the barbershop used to be. So it was a great place, and cartoonists used to gather there. Not so much fun since it's condos now. For this next bit, I want to focus on the Minnesota connection. This is Charles Schulz from the Whoopi Goldberg show. And the quote he's saying there is, I always wanted to be suave. You know, I'm from Minnesota. There's no suave people in Minnesota. It's too cold. So I always connected to Schulz's like self-deprecating humor. And I think sometimes the biographies get it a little off because they take like a statement like that out of context, and they say it without the wink and the smile that Schulz had, and it comes out just as this depressing thing where it's like, no, it's a joke. We all go through this stuff. So here's some Twin Cities comics. These are some comic strips that feature the Twin Cities, and I'm going to read a little bit here because just so you can read it. But in the second panel, Sally's saying, I want to learn about religion. I want to learn about Moses, St. Paul, Minneapolis. And then they have, I love that, Minneapolis. Now that's from the 70s. These next couple strips are from the 90s. I love the first strip, first of all, because it was also ran on my birthday. But, hi, Sally, is Charlie Brown there? And Sally just says, we'll always have Minneapolis. That's my new philosophy. It sounds good. Is Charlie Brown there? We'll always have Minneapolis. Who were you talking to? Practically nobody. And then in the bottom strip, you have rerun. I'm just going to read strips now. So, I thought you didn't paint flowers. These are space flowers from Jupiter. They're attacking Minneapolis, but Tarzan comes to rescue them. I didn't know Tarzan was ever in Minneapolis. He used to ice skate there in the winter. I think you're slowly going mad. I may have to hire someone to do my lettering. Oh my God. If you ever get a Peanuts collection, it's amazing how much it's like a drumbeat of humor, just strip after strip. Just knocks it out of the park. Now, I want to focus on Schulz's love for comics and comic strips. Schulz said had said of his father, his one passion was the funny papers. This is Charles Schulz talking about his dad. He loved comics and read them the way some men read box scores or racing forums, with intensity and devotion. He bought 4 Sunday newspapers every week for the comics, picking up the 2 local papers on Saturday evening, hot off the press. This is when cities had more than one local paper. So you could pick up like 3 to 4 different papers and just have all those different comics pages. And there were rival papers, so they would not have the same comic strips. They would try to outdo each other as far as who had the best comic strips. And so a couple more quotes from Schulz. I used to buy every comic book that came out. I bought every Big Little book that came out. I can still remember the day when Superman came out in Action Comics. I took over to a friend of mine and we thought, wow, I knew this guy had something. The drawing was so nice to look at. It wasn't as slick as the latest Superman, but it was fun to look at, and I knew this guy really had something. Now, this strip, once again featuring Rerun, this was printed just like within a year of Schulz passing away. He was 77 years old. And he still had that same connection to comics, also where the market was, because you have the classmate of Rerun saying, we're supposed to be painting flowers today. And Rerun is like, well, I don't want to do flowers. I want to do underground comics. See, here's Billie Jean King and Daffy Duck throwing Long John Silver off the pirate ship. Billie Jean King was a friend of Schulz, so that's like a little nod to her. I have big plans for my work. Goes up to the teacher. Yes, ma'am. These will be consecutive numbered limited edition prints. Each print will be signed and accompanied by a certificate of authentication. And then, yes, ma'am, I understand. Okay, what did she say? She said, today we're painting flowers. Anyone who loves comic art, who loves to just draw their own stuff, who's been in an art class, they're Rerun. They know this. So another thing, another cartoonist that Charles Schulz looked up to incredibly was Bill Malden. So every Veterans Day and Memorial Day, he would just give a little salute to Bill Malden in his strip. In the bottom strip there, Bill Malden was known for doing Willie and Joe during World War II. And he actually inserted a Willie and Joe drawing, a Bill Malden drawing of Willie and Joe into the strip and saying, you know, Willie and Joe, my heroes, happy Veterans Day, man. So Schulz was actually a staff sergeant and squad leader of a 50 caliber machine gun team in World War II. So as a lover of comics, he really appreciated Bill Malden's cartoons, and they really hit home for him. He said of Bill Malden, cartooning was lifted to the highest level that it had ever been. And he was once actually asked of this is from Schulz, somebody asked me a couple months ago, of all the awards you've received, what award are you most proud of? And all of a sudden occurred to me, the Combat Infantry Badge. I'm more proud of that than receiving the Combat Infantry Badge than having won the Rubens twice. So just something, his connection to his war service, also his connection to Bill Malden. Now, I want to touch base, another thing that Schulz did as far as having Franklin in the strip, which these days it's like nothing. Why wouldn't Franklin be in the strip? He put Franklin in the strip during the middle of the civil rights movement. And just from the bottom there, so there incredible turmoil in the country, of course, during the 60s. And so reading from the bottom, another editor protested once when Franklin was sitting in the same row of school desks with Peppermint Patty. The editor said, "We have enough trouble here in the South without you showing the kids together in school. but I never paid attention to those things. And I remember telling Larry Ruttman, he was the president of United Feature, who Schulz worked for, at the time about Franklin. He wanted me to change it, so not have Franklin in the strip with Peppermint Patty. And we talked about it a long while on the phone, and I finally sighed and said, well, Larry, let's put it this way. Either you print it just the way I draw it, or I quit. How's that? So it was just Schulz, first of all, that he had the mindset, because if you are not in a paper, you're getting paid by how many papers you're in. So if papers in the South drop him, which they did, he just loses money. So for him to say, I'm going to have him in the strip, that's all there is to it. He's taken a financial hit because of it, but more power to him. Now, you skip ahead 50 years. This is a Sally Forth strip I did with Francesco, and I did with Hill and her friend Duncan. And you'd like to think after 50 years, after the civil rights movement, that things have changed. But we got comments like, I hope you're not going to get Hillary into an interracial affair. If so, then I will boycott your strip. Another one, I've been enjoying your comic till you started injecting interracial dating with the latest storyline. I am a conservative traditionalist, and I don't think that subject should be in a comic. I mean, it's kids, friends, they're friends at school. So it's amazing how far we've come in the country, but also how far we have yet to go. Now, I'm going to go, this is actually the last Sunday page, which ran of Schulz's run. So on the eve of his final strip, Charles Schulz passed away in his sleep at his home in Santa Rosa, California. He was 77 years old. That he died on the eve of his last strip being published, how more iconic can you get? When he was diagnosed with colon cancer in November of '99, he decided to end the strip so he could concentrate on getting better. But Schulz stipulated in his contract that the syndicate couldn't hire someone else to draw the strip in his place. So when you see animation, comic books, anything like that, yes, they're done by a different creative team than Charles Schulz. They have a company that is producing this stuff, but the comic strip, as far as rerunning it, it was never continued with a new artist. That was stipulated in the contract. Everything in the strip is Charles Schulz. Now, Paige Braddock is the creative director at Peanut Studio in Santa Rosa. She helped put together this strip. This is from Paige Braddock. For the Sunday comic, now this is when Charles Schulz is sick. I sat with Sparky and I asked him to tell me what his favorite visuals were from the strip. Communication was difficult with him, but we took our time. He said that he thought it was funny when Snoopy tried to steal Linus's blanket. He laughed at the image of Lucy getting hit on the head with a baseball. He was particularly proud of Snoopy as the flying ace, and he chuckled about Peppermint Patty fumbling through school. I tried to reflect those favorite moments of his as if Snoopy was remembering them as he typed Sparky's message to fans. In the end, because I lifted elements from previous work, it can be said that Schulz authored every single comic strip. That was important to him, and it was important to me. I will forever feel a sense of reverence for those moments with Sparky when he was at his most vulnerable. Providence allowed me to be there to help him when he needed it, and for that I am grateful. Now, when he was sick in '99, this is a cartoon I did of Flash Gordon for him. All the cartoonists were sending him strips, just hoping he got better. So there's actually a collection of these, if you're interested, from the Schulz Museum. Now, I only met Schulz once. It was at the National Cartoonist Society Rubens Award in '95. It was held in New York. I was living in New York. I was at this thing with Jerry Kraft, who we both worked on staff at King. We were both aspiring cartoonists. Side note, Jerry has since become an award-winning graphic novelist, just giving a shout out. But we spotted Schulz and we went over to say hello. Now, nervous to meet this icon in the field, but I figured I had an in because I was a Minnesota cartoonist, so I led with that. It's like, oh, Minnesota cartoonist, you know, saying hello. I had mentioned that I had just started doing Flash Gordon, but, you know, kind of self-deprecating. I said, you know, it wasn't in many papers, though, at the time. And he said, well, you know, when I first started doing Peanuts, it wasn't in many papers either. So, you know, we're on the same page there. And that was so huge to me that he just gave those words of encouragement. Because having been in the industry as long as I have, that's not always the case. Some cartoonists are very welcoming and helpful, some not so much, and I had experienced both. So his words of encouragement were just huge. I only talked to him briefly. I've forgotten most of what was said, but he couldn't have been nicer. In Sally Forth, Francesco and I were both big Peanuts fans, and we paid homage to him like numerous times. November of 2022, comic strip creators across the country paid tribute to Charles Schulz on what would have been his 100th birthday. This is a strip that Francesco and I did, and I really enjoyed. There's a lot of stuff done digitally now, of course, with comics. I use a Wacom tablet myself, but I made a point as far as to make sure doing this strip that I did it in pen and ink like Charles Schulz would have, just as also a nod to Charles Schulz. If you're interested in more on Schulz, I really recommend this book. It's by Fantagraphics. Not going to read the quotes, but everything written in here just really hits home because of just it's all Charles Schulz in his own words, as opposed to sometimes secondhand information which may not be on the wall, like just may not be on point. Pretty much what you're hearing from me. This is secondhand information. So, recommend this book highly. Now, just wrapping up, the Twin Cities has an incredible just local comic art scene. You have the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, which has a major in comic art. You have Autoptic, which is a comic arts festival, which happens every other year. There's going to be one this fall. You have SpringCon, boom. You have FallCon, which is going to be in the grandstand, I believe, this fall.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. You have Twin Cities Con. So you have, and then the comic book stores, Nostalgia Zone, Dreamhaven. You have so many great just areas here. So make sure to go out there, support the local cartoonists by buying their stuff. And there's just amazing work out there. I'm going to be out there as well, of course. I even have a QR code because I'm very 21st century. If you want to get my link tree either here or at my table. But in the end, I just want to say it's readers and fans like you that keep this whole industry alive, not the publishers, not the corporations. So thanks for coming, and just give yourselves a big round of applause because it's you guys that keep this thing going.
Thank you. So, wow, so thorough. Like, you hit all my bullet points. Anyway,
Very thorough.
I do have one question, though, that I want to ask for the audience. You have a Patreon.
Yes, I do.
And some of the information that you were presenting, like the tips and
some of the
coaching, I just wanted to make sure that you let everyone know if they don't know it already.
You're good. So I have a Patreon, and Patreon it's literally Patreon/Jim Keefe. Also, the QR code will bring you right to my link tree to get all the information you would like. But the Patreon has drawing tips. It has artist spotlights, like people I like. I have, of course, there's a subscription model there, but I also have just a lot of stuff like up there for free, just so, you know, to get people interested in it. I have like, here's the tools I have, here's the materials I use, both traditional and as far as digital. So a lot of stuff there just to peruse if you're interested in learning more. Also, a lot of artist spotlights and just a lot of stuff that has to deal with where I'm at, stuff I'm going to be doing, and lots of conventions coming up as well, that anything, all that kind of information is posted.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm not going to do a mic drop because these are expensive.
And thank you everyone for attending the panel. We got another one coming up in 5 minutes.
Yay!